I never thought I'd end up in a lighthouse. To most people, that sounds like something out of a movie, a romanticized notion of stormy seas, ships crashing through waves, and a lonely figure standing guard by the light. But for me, it wasn't romance or adventure that led me here. It was desperation. My name is James Holloway. I'm a veteran, retired in body but never truly in spirit. After my discharge, life didn't exactly unfold the way I'd imagined. The discipline and brotherhood I once had evaporated into long nights of silence, bills piling up faster than I could pay them, and the gnawing sense that I'd been forgotten by the world I served. The last few years had been especially hard. My small pension barely stretched to cover rent, groceries, and medicine. The landlord wasn't patient, and the walls of my old apartment felt tighter every day. It was no place for me, and certainly no place for Duke, my German shepherd, my closest companion, my only family. Duke had been with me since I returned home, a rescue dog from a shelter. Funny thing is, he saved me just as much as I saved him. His loyalty was unwavering, his instinct sharper than any I'd ever seen. Whenever I struggled with nightmares from my service, he was there, nudging my hand, pulling me back from the edge. When the eviction notice came, I packed what little I had. I didn't have a plan, just the hope that somehow, someway, life would give me one more chance. That's when I found the listing, an abandoned lighthouse. It wasn't in the papers. No real estate office had it posted. I came across it while scrolling through an obscure government auction website where forgotten properties were listed for next to nothing. The description was short. Deserted lighthouse, coastal property, uninhabited, needs extensive repair. Sold as is, minimum bid, $50. $50. That was less than what I paid for groceries in a week. At first I laughed. Why would anyone want a broken-down lighthouse? Then I thought of Duke. He needed open space to run. I thought of myself, a man who needed silence, who needed somewhere far away from the noise of city streets and the judgments of people who didn't know me. So I bid. To my surprise, no one else did. Within days, I was the owner of a deserted lighthouse perched on a lonely stretch of coast. When Duke and I first arrived, the place looked like it had been ripped out of another century. The tall stone tower rose above jagged cliffs, its windows dark and cracked. Rusted iron railings clung desperately to the spiral stairwell outside, and the paint was peeling so badly it looked more like old skin than walls. The cottage beside the tower, once the keeper's quarters, leaned dangerously to one side, its roof sagging from years of storms and salt air. The smell of brine and decay carried on the wind, and somewhere far off, gulls cried into the grey horizon. To anyone else, it would have looked like a nightmare. To me, it looked like a second chance. I set down my bags in the cottage, and Duke bounded ahead, nose to the ground, tail wagging furiously. He darted from room to room, sniffing every corner as though he knew we'd just claimed something important. Watching him, I felt the smallest flicker of hope ignite in my chest. We spent the first few days making the place livable. I patched leaks, hammered loose boards, and set up a makeshift bed in the corner of the main room. There wasn't electricity, at least not working electricity, but I found an old generator that, with some coaxing, rumbled to life. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Nights in the lighthouse were unlike anything I'd ever known. The ocean never slept. Waves crashed endlessly against the rocks below, and the wind howled like an old ghost through the broken windows. Sometimes I swore I could hear voices carried on that wind, whispers of keepers long gone, warnings lost in the roar of the sea. But it wasn't just the ocean that unsettled me. It was Duke. He had always been calm, steady. But here in the lighthouse he was different. At night he would stand at the foot of the spiral staircase leading up the tower, his ears pricked, his body tense. Sometimes he growled low, a sound that rumbled deep in his chest like distant thunder. The first time I noticed it, I brushed it off. Old places creak. Maybe he smelled raccoons or seagulls nesting in the cracks. But as the nights wore on, his behavior became harder to ignore. One evening I found him pawing frantically at the corner of the main room, where the floorboards met the wall. He dug and clawed as though something were hidden beneath. "Duke," I called, kneeling beside him. "What is it, boy?" He looked at me, his eyes sharp, ears twitching. Then he barked, a loud, insistent bark that echoed off the empty walls. I pressed my palm against the floor where he'd been digging. At first it felt solid, but then I noticed it. The faintest hollow sound, different from the rest of the boards. I frowned, running my hand along the seams. The wood looked no different than anywhere else, but the sound, it was undeniable. "Something under here," I whispered. Duke barked again, pawing harder. For the first time since arriving at the lighthouse, I felt something stir inside me that wasn't despair. It was curiosity, dangerous, intoxicating curiosity. I fetched my crowbar, wedging it into the gap between the boards. The wood groaned, resisted, then splintered as I pried it free. Dust and cobwebs spilled out, and beneath the broken plank, I saw a black void, a hollow space, a hidden compartment. I leaned closer, shining my flashlight down into the darkness. The beam revealed rough stone walls and what looked like the edge of a staircase spiraling downward. The air that wafted up was different, colder, heavier, tinged with something metallic. Duke growled again, his body rigid as he stared into the hole. I swallowed hard. This lighthouse wasn't just deserted. It was hiding something. And whatever was down there, someone hadn't wanted it to be found. The hole in the floor yawned at me like the open mouth of the earth itself. Dust and stale air wafted up from the gap, heavy with the scent of stone, rust, and something else I couldn't place. Something old, almost metallic, like dried blood. Duke stood stiff, his ears pricked forward, hackles rising along his back. He didn't growl this time, but his body said enough. He didn't like this, not one bit. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and crouched closer. The beam caught the rough outline of stone steps spiraling downward into darkness. My first thought was, why would a lighthouse need stairs beneath the keeper's quarters? A basement, sure, storage maybe. But this wasn't just a cellar. This felt deeper, older. "Stay close," I whispered to Duke, more to steady myself than to command him. Lowering myself through the gap, I felt the air grow colder as my boots touched the first stone step. The walls pressed in tight, damp and clammy beneath my fingertips. Duke hesitated above, whining softly. But after a moment he leapt down beside me, landing with a thud that echoed off the stone. The further we descended, the more the lighthouse above seemed to vanish. The sounds of the ocean and the wind faded, until all I could hear was the scuff of my boots and Duke's steady breathing. After what felt like minutes, the staircase ended in a narrow corridor. The stone here was different, smoother, like it had been cut with intention. My flashlight beam glided across faint markings etched into the walls. Not writing, not exactly. Symbols, circles intersecting with lines, jagged angles curling into spirals. I reached out and brushed my hand across one. The grooves were shallow but precise, carved by someone who wanted them to last. Duke's nose twitched as he sniffed the air, then he froze, tail rigid, staring straight ahead. "See something?" I whispered. I followed his gaze. The corridor ended at a heavy iron door. Rust clung to its surface like scabs, but the structure was intact. My flashlight caught a faint glimmer in its center, a large circular lock, unlike any I'd seen before. No keyhole, just a recessed disc with the same strange symbols etched around its edge. I pressed my ear against the cold metal. Silence. Yet the hairs on my arms prickled, as if something was waiting on the other side. Logic told me to turn back, seal the hole, forget I ever found this, and get on with my life. But curiosity, that dangerous spark, burned brighter now. "Guess we're not in Kansas anymore, huh, Duke?" I muttered, my voice shaking. I tried the door, half expecting it to be sealed shut forever. To my surprise, it groaned open an inch, just enough to let out a burst of air that was so cold it felt like ice on my skin. Duke barked sharply, leaping back. The smell that rushed out was worse than anything yet. Damp earth, iron, and a sweetness that made my stomach twist. I gagged, pulling my shirt over my nose. God! The door creaked wider, as if inviting us in. I raised the flashlight, the beam trembling in my grip. Beyond the threshold lay a vast, cavernous chamber, far larger than should have been possible beneath the lighthouse. The ceiling arched high above, lost in shadow, and the walls were lined with alcoves. In each alcove stood shapes, Tall, narrow, draped in rotting cloth. Figures. Duke growled low, his eyes fixed on them. My breath caught. For a moment I thought they were people, dozens of them standing silently in rows along the chamber walls. But as I edged closer, the truth emerged. They weren't alive, they weren't even whole. They were statues. Figures carved from stone, some crumbling, others preserved almost too perfectly. Their faces were obscured, some eroded into blankness, others covered by masks that looked disturbingly human. And in the center of the room, raised on a stone dais, was something that froze me in place. A chest, iron-bound, scarred with the same symbols etched into the walls. Its surface shimmered faintly under my flashlight, as if it resisted the light itself. Duke barked again, the sound sharp and commanding. He wanted me away from it. He wanted us out. But my feet moved forward, slow and unsteady, drawn as though the chest itself were pulling me closer. I swallowed, my mouth dry. "Duke," I whispered, barely audible. "What the hell did we just find?" I stood frozen before the dais, the beam of my flashlight quivering over the chest's iron surface. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that this wasn't just an ordinary relic buried beneath an old lighthouse. The symbols etched into its iron bands pulsed faintly as the light hit them, creating the illusion of movement. They almost looked alive, as though they shifted and writhed when I wasn't staring directly at them. Duke's growls grew sharper. He circled me, stepping between me and the chest as if trying to push me back toward the door. His eyes weren't just alert, they were wide, fearful. "Easy, boy," I whispered, though my own voice betrayed a tremor. "Just a box. That's all it is." But deep down I didn't believe that. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the chest's surface. It was colder than ice, so cold it made my skin sting. I jerked my hand back instinctively, shaking the pins and needles from my fingertips. Then came the sound, a faint clink, not from me, from inside the chest. I staggered back, nearly tripping over Duke. His bark echoed through the cavern, bouncing off the stone walls like a warning shot. I raised the flashlight again, heart hammering in my chest. "Something's in there," I breathed. The rational part of me screamed to leave it alone. Walk away, seal the staircase, pretend none of this existed. But there was another part, the part that had kept me alive in war zones, the part that could never walk away from a mystery, no matter how dangerous. I examined the lock again. It wasn't like any lock I'd ever seen. The circular disc sat flush with the surface, the symbols surrounding it like numbers on a dial. No keyhole, no latch, just patterns. My hand drifted toward the carvings, tracing one of the symbols almost unconsciously. As I touched it, the disc gave the faintest click, and the iron bands shimmered as though a current of electricity passed through them. I froze. Duke barked sharply, backing up with his tail tucked. The carvings had rearranged themselves. I swear they had. Like the chest was waiting. I stumbled back, sucking in a breath. The air in the chamber had changed. It was thicker now, heavier, like being deep underwater. My ears popped, and the back of my neck prickled as if unseen eyes were watching. For the first time since stepping into that room, I wondered if I'd made a mistake I couldn't undo. "Not today," I muttered, more to convince myself. I turned, flashlight sweeping back across the rows of statues. My pulse spiked. Had one of them shifted? I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes, but the figures stood as still and silent as before. Dust clung to their robes, cracks lined their faces. Yet for the briefest moment, I could have sworn one of the masked statues had tilted ever so slightly toward me. I swallowed hard and forced a laugh that sounded more like a gasp. Lack of sleep, that's all. I took Duke by the collar and tugged him toward the iron door. He resisted at first, ears pinned back, eyes darting between me and the chest, but he eventually relented. Together we left the chamber, forcing the heavy door closed behind us. The clang of metal sealing shut reverberated down the corridor and into my bones. I climbed the spiral staircase 2 steps at a time, desperate for the open air. When I emerged into the keeper's quarters, the salty sting of the ocean breeze rushing through the cracked windows never felt so good. But something had changed. The air smelled different, sharper, almost metallic, like the scent that had lingered beneath the ground. The lantern in the corner, which I was certain had been cold and dark when I entered the passage, now flickered weakly with a dying flame, and on the floorboards near the hidden hatch lay something that hadn't been there before, a small iron disc, smooth, circular, etched with those same shifting symbols. I bent down slowly, heart hammering in my ears. Duke barked furiously at it, teeth bared, as though the thing itself were alive. When I picked it up, the symbols pulsed once with a faint glow and then went still. The chest had given me a key. That night, sleep never came. I sat in the keeper's chair near the broken window, the iron disc heavy in my hand. Duke lay at my feet, his ears twitching with every creak of the old building. Neither of us could rest. The disc was colder than stone, yet it pulsed faintly when I gripped it tighter. I turned it over and over, tracing the etched markings. They weren't random scratches. They were deliberate, purposeful, and ancient. A part of me wanted to march right back down into the cavern and slam it into the chest's circular lock. But another part, the part that still valued life, screamed at me to wait, to think, to listen. And that's when I heard it. At first I thought it was the wind whistling through cracks in the lighthouse, but the sound carried rhythm, cadence, whispers. Duke lifted his head, ears stiff. His growl rolled low in his throat. I froze. The whispers grew clearer, rising from the spiral staircase. No, that's impossible, I muttered, shoving the disc into my coat pocket. I grabbed my flashlight and crept toward the hatch. The whispers faded, replaced by silence so complete it pressed against my eardrums. I waited, every muscle tense, but nothing followed. Finally, I backed away, telling myself I was hearing things, but deep down, I knew the truth. The chest wanted me back. The following morning, Duke woke me with frantic barking. He stood at the broken window, his paws scratching at the sill. I rushed over and froze. Down at the shoreline, half hidden in the morning fog, a man stood watching the lighthouse. He didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there facing the tower, coat flapping in the breeze. My blood ran cold. Nobody had visited this place in years. Nobody even knew it was habitable. "Who the hell are you?" I muttered under my breath. Duke barked harder, his teeth bared. But when I blinked, the man was gone. The fog swallowed him whole. I scanned the rocky beach for minutes, my pulse racing, but found nothing. No footprints, no sign he'd been there at all. Had I imagined it? Or worse, was I being watched? That night, the whispers returned, louder, clearer. They weren't just sounds now, they were words. "Open it." The disc in my pocket grew warm, almost unbearably so. My fingers curled around it before I even realized I'd reached for it. Duke whimpered, pressing against my leg. He wanted no part of this, but I already knew the lighthouse wasn't just deserted. It was waiting, and whatever secret was buried inside that chest wasn't just meant to stay hidden. It was meant to be found. I couldn't ignore it anymore. By the next evening, I'd replayed the whispers 100 times in my head. They weren't hallucinations. They weren't echoes of loneliness. They were a summons, a demand. So with Duke reluctantly padding behind me, I descended into the cavern again. The air grew colder with every step down the spiral stairs, damp stones sweating beneath my fingers. The lantern I carried swayed, shadows stretching like skeletal arms across the walls. When I reached the carved chamber, the chest seemed to breathe in the light, as if it had been waiting for me. I knelt, pulled the iron disc from my coat pocket, and pressed it against the circular indentation. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the stone shivered. A deep vibration rumbled through the floor. Dust rained from the ceiling. The carved symbols around the chest flickered faintly, like dying embers reigniting. Duke barked furiously, his claws skittering on the cavern floor. He wanted me to stop, but I didn't. The disc slid into place with a soft click. The chest groaned as though ancient gears had been forced awake after centuries. And then, silence. I reached for the lid, sweat cold on my palms, when Duke lunged forward, teeth snapping, pulling me back by my sleeve. His growls echoed sharp and frantic. I froze, confused, until I heard it. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and far too human. I extinguished the lantern in a rush, plunging the cavern into blackness. My pulse thundered as I dragged Duke into the shadows. The footsteps grew closer, descending the spiral stairs. Whoever it was, they knew exactly where they were going. A faint beam of light cut through the chamber, a flashlight, and then a voice. "Finally," the stranger muttered. "After all these years." The light swept across the chest, then paused. His shadow stretched across the carvings, tall and sharp against the stone. I gripped Duke's collar to keep him from growling, my breath trapped in my lungs. Whoever this man was, he wasn't here by accident. He knew the chest, he knew the hatch, he knew everything. And worst of all, he wasn't leaving empty-handed. The beam of the flashlight sliced across the chamber, catching the carvings in a pale glow. My heart hammered against my ribs. As I crouched in the dark, Duke pressed tight against me. The stranger moved with purpose. No hesitation, no awe at what he was seeing. He'd been here before, or at the very least, he'd been waiting for this moment a long time. He crouched in front of the chest, fingertips brushing the stone, tracing the symbols I'd barely begun to understand. "This should have stayed buried," he muttered, almost to himself. But I suppose it was only a matter of time. Duke's low growl vibrated against my leg, his body rigid. I tightened my grip on his collar, but his instincts were screaming louder than mine. The stranger's light swept suddenly across the chamber and froze. On me. "Why?" "Step out," he ordered, his voice calm but sharp as steel. "And don't bother hiding, the dog gave you away." For a moment I thought about staying put, but then Duke lunged forward, dragging me a step out of the shadows, his teeth flashing in the faint light. The stranger didn't flinch. He straightened, the flashlight steady in one hand, the other resting casually in his coat pocket. "You don't know what you've touched, do you?" he asked. His voice was almost pitying. I swallowed hard. It's just an old chest, just an old chest." He gave a cold laugh. "Men have died keeping this hidden. Empires have fallen over what's inside. And you think it's just an old chest?" The words chilled me, but something in his tone, weary, bitter, dangerous, told me he wasn't exaggerating. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Who are you?" He tilted his head. "The one trying to make sure fools like you don't wake what should stay asleep." Duke barked furiously, straining against me, as if he sensed more than just human danger here. The stranger's gaze flicked to him, unreadable, then back to me. "You need to leave this place," he said. "Walk away. Forget the hatch. Forget the chest. Forget everything." "And if I don't?" I asked. He smiled, not kindly. "Then you won't leave at all." Before I could react, he stepped closer, pulling something from his coat. Not a gun, not a knife. Something stranger. A small metal device no bigger than a compass, etched with the same kind of symbols that marked the chest. He held it up, and the carvings on the stone walls responded. Faint lines of light crawled across them, glowing like veins of fire. Duke snapped, barking wildly, lunging toward him. The chamber seemed to tremble again, the air humming with an energy I couldn't explain. I realized then, this man wasn't just here to steal or destroy, he was here to control it. But Duke wasn't about to let him. The moment the man stepped closer to the chest, Duke broke free of my grip and lunged, teeth bared, a blur of fur and fury. The stranger stumbled back, the device clattering to the ground. His flashlight swung wildly, shadows dancing across the chamber. I didn't think. I dove forward, scooped up the device, and scrambled back. For the first time, the stranger's calm cracked. His eyes flared with panic. "Give that back," he roared. But I didn't. I held it tight, even as the strange heat from the device burned into my palm. Because for the first time, I wasn't just curious. I was part of this now. And there was no going back. The chamber felt alive in a way it hadn't before. The carvings on the walls pulsed faintly, as though the stone itself was breathing. The device in my hand throbbed with a warmth that bordered on pain, like it wanted to be somewhere else. Or maybe with someone else. The stranger's voice cut through the vibrating air. "You don't know what you've stolen," he snarled, taking a step forward. His calm facade had fractured into something sharp, unhinged. "That device isn't yours to hold. Give it back before you doom yourself and everyone else." Duke barked, snapping at the man's boots, forcing him to keep his distance. The sound echoed off the stone, magnified by the unnatural acoustics of the chamber. I backed away, clutching the device tighter. "You had your chance. You weren't protecting this place. You were controlling it." The man's lips curled into a cold sneer. "Control is the only kind of protection that works. You think loyalty and good intentions will keep this sealed?" He gestured toward the chest. "That thing has slept for decades because men like me made sure it did." Before I could answer, the ground rumbled beneath us, stronger than before, sending dust and small stones cascading from the ceiling. Duke whined, tail stiff, as if the earth itself had warned us that time was running out. The stranger lunged. I stumbled back, heart pounding, fumbling in the dark. His hand shot for the device, but Duke leapt between us, sinking his teeth into the man's coat sleeve. A violent struggle broke out. Growls, shouts, scraping boots on stone. "Duke!" I yelled, but my faithful companion held on, refusing to let go. I used the distraction to move, shoving the device into my jacket pocket, freeing both hands. My fingers found the flashlight I'd dropped earlier, and I flicked it on, the beam cutting across the chamber. There. The hatch. I sprinted toward it, Duke releasing his grip just long enough to follow me. Behind us, the man cursed, his voice echoing like a curse through the cavern. The narrow passage was tighter on the way out, or maybe my panic just made it feel that way. My shoulders scraped against stone, my breath ragged. Duke darted ahead, his nails clicking frantically against the rock. The stranger's voice followed, ragged and furious. "You don't understand what you're unleashing." The tunnel trembled again, loose dirt raining down. I kept moving, one hand outstretched to steady myself, the other guarding the pocket where the device burned against my ribs. Finally, we burst out of the tunnel and into the ruined lighthouse. I gasped at the sudden space, at the cold night air that seeped through broken windows. But we weren't safe. A silhouette filled the hatch behind us. The stranger's flashlight beam cut through the dust, locking on me. His voice was ragged but relentless. "You can't run. That device doesn't belong to you. Hand it over, or the next time the ground moves, this place will come down on your head." For a heartbeat, I believed him. The tremors, the way the chest and walls seemed to react to the device. Maybe it would bring the whole structure crashing down. But Duke stepped between us, hackles raised, his teeth bared in silent defiance. And I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't running away from the fight. I was running into it. "Then you'd better catch us," I said, and bolted for the shattered doorway. Duke followed, and the night swallowed us whole. The night air outside the lighthouse was sharp, carrying the scent of salt and rust. My lungs burned as I stumbled over the rocks, Duke at my side, his tongue lolling, as though he hadn't just fought like a soldier. The waves crashed below us, steady and unchanging, the only thing in this entire nightmare that still felt real. I didn't stop running until the lighthouse was just a jagged silhouette against the sky. Only then did I crouch behind a ridge of stone, my hands trembling as I clutched the device. It glowed faintly now, as though it fed on my racing heartbeat. Duke pressed against my leg, warm and steady. His ears swiveled, scanning for any sound of pursuit. The stranger hadn't followed us. Not yet. But his words clung to me like oil. "You don't know what you've stolen." I turned the device over in my hands. It was heavier than it looked, crafted from metal that wasn't quite steel, etched with grooves that caught the moonlight. The strange symbols weren't random scratches. They were deliberate, careful. And in the shifting light they seemed to move. I fished the notebook from my pack. Old habits. The army taught me to record, sketch, track every detail. I began copying the marks, one by one, each symbol more alien than the last. Duke whined softly, his nose brushing the page. His eyes followed the device, wary, like he understood more than I did. "You feel it too, don't you, boy?" I whispered. The ground didn't tremble out here, but I could still feel something. A faint hum, low and constant, resonating in my chest like a second heartbeat. When I touched one of the carved lines, the device pulsed. A sharp warmth spread up my arm, not painful but not natural either. My vision blurred, and for the briefest moment, I saw something that wasn't the night sky. A map. Or maybe not a map, but coordinates. Shapes like coastlines. Grids of light. Shifting. Incomplete. And then it was gone, leaving me gasping, the cold air a slap in the face. Duke barked once, sharp, as if to ground me. I sat back hard on the rocks, pressing my hand over the device. My heart raced, not just with fear but with something else. Recognition. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't meant to sit in a chest beneath a ruined lighthouse. It was meant to connect. But connect to what? The memory of the stranger's words returned. Men like me made sure it stayed sealed. That meant he wasn't alone. I scanned the horizon, paranoia twisting my gut. The lighthouse loomed against the sky, its broken crown jutting like a skeletal finger. If he had allies, if they were already on their way, Duke and I couldn't stay here. Yet the thought of leaving the device behind was worse. It wasn't just curiosity. It was instinct. I slipped it back into my jacket, close to my chest. "We'll figure it out," I muttered. "Just you and me, Duke. We'll crack this thing before he gets another shot." Duke wagged his tail once, but kept his ears forward, still alert. We moved inland, away from the cliffs, away from the lighthouse. The night was quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath. I found a ruined shed half buried in the dunes, and ducked inside. It smelled of rot and seawater, but it would do. I spread out my notebook, shining the flashlight on the symbols I'd copied. I tried matching them, rearranging them. Nothing made sense at first, but as exhaustion blurred my mind, patterns began to emerge. Certain marks clustered together, like words or phrases. Some looked eerily close to ancient runes I'd seen in history books, but twisted, reimagined. And one set of symbols repeated more than the others. A circle. Inside it, a spiral. It matched the carving on the chest back in the chamber. Duke's low growl pulled me from the page. His eyes were fixed on the crack in the shed door, body rigid. I killed the flashlight instantly, plunging us into darkness. Through the slit, a pale light swept across the dunes. Not the moon, a flashlight. The stranger was back, and this time, he wasn't alone. Duke's growl deepened, low and steady. I pressed my hand to his back, feeling the tremor of muscle coiled like a spring. Through the crack in the door, beams of light swept the dunes in careful arcs. Not frantic, not searching blind, methodical. Whoever they were, they knew what they were looking for. My stomach tightened. The stranger had just been trying to scare me earlier. He'd bought himself time to call in help. I gripped the device through my jacket. Its faint hum had grown stronger since we fled the lighthouse, as though it knew it was being hunted. A sharp whistle cut through the night, answered by another. Then boots crunching over gravel. More than one. 3. Maybe 4. Armed. Probably. Men like that didn't come unprepared. I looked at Duke. His ears twitched toward the sounds, eyes locked, body taut, ready to defend me no matter the odds. But a firefight out here would be suicide. We needed higher ground, we needed the lighthouse. I slipped out of the shed's back wall, the board soft enough to push through without a sound. Duke followed, a shadow at my side. We crouched low, moving fast along the dune ridges, keeping the lighthouse in sight. Behind us, voices carried. Short, clipped commands. Not English, Eastern European, maybe Russian. My stomach knotted tighter. Whoever these men were, they weren't just treasure hunters. The lighthouse loomed closer, black against the stars. My legs burned, but the sight pulled me forward. If the chamber beneath it was designed to hide this device, then maybe it was also the only place to keep it safe. We reached the base just as a beam of light swept over the rocks. Shouts rang out. They'd spotted us. "Go," I hissed. Duke bounded ahead, claws scraping the stone steps. I pushed after him, lungs heaving. Bullets cracked through the night, sparking off the rocks, biting into the stairs. The old reflexes kicked in. Duck, pivot, keep moving. Don't stop. We dove through the lighthouse's broken doorway just as another round ricocheted off the frame. Dust rained from the rotting beams. Inside, the chamber yawned below, shadows stretching like grasping fingers. The device's glow flared, pulsing with urgency. I didn't hesitate. I tore down the spiral staircase, Duke at my heels. The underground chamber greeted us like the belly of a beast. The carvings in the walls seemed alive, shimmering in the device's light. And for the first time, I noticed they weren't random. They aligned with the marks in my notebook, the repeated symbols forming a circle at the far end of the chamber. A seal. Duke barked sharp just as footsteps thundered above. The intruders were inside. Their voices echoed, bouncing down the stone stairwell. No time left. I pressed the device against the carved circle. It fit like a key sliding into a lock. The walls shuddered. Dust poured from the ceiling as the circle flared to life, a radiant glow spilling out in waves. The hum in my chest surged until it was deafening. The stone split down the middle with a grinding roar, revealing a hidden passage beyond. A tunnel carved deep into the bedrock. Cold air blasted out, carrying a metallic tang that stung my nose. Duke barked again, but it wasn't a warning this time. It was urgency. He darted forward into the passage. Shouts erupted at the chamber's entrance. Flashlights cut through the dark, beams scattering across the stone. The intruders had arrived. I yanked the device free and sprinted after Duke, plunging into the newly opened passage. The tunnel swallowed us in darkness, the walls glowing faintly with veins of light that pulsed in rhythm with the device. Behind us, gunfire cracked, ricocheting off stone. But the passage was already closing, the seal grinding shut like the jaws of some ancient beast. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed their lights was the stranger's face. Cold, furious, and afraid. Then the stone slammed shut. Duke and I were alone. Alone in a tunnel no one was meant to enter. And ahead, in the distance, something glowed with a steady, unearthly light. The tunnel stretched on, cold and damp, the faint glow guiding Duke and me deeper underground. My boots splashed through shallow pools, the air metallic and stale, thick with the weight of centuries. Every step carried the hum of the device, vibrating through my bones like a second heartbeat. Duke's ears twitched at every sound, water dripping, stone shifting. But he pressed forward, as if he somehow knew this was the way. The passage widened into a cavern so vast, my flashlight beam couldn't reach the ceiling. At its center rose a massive circular structure. Not stone, not metal, but something in between. Its surface shimmered with patterns of light, the same symbols etched into the lighthouse walls. It looked alive. Duke barked once, sharp and commanding, as if to say, "This is it." I approached slowly, my chest tightening. The device in my hand pulsed in rhythm with the glowing structure. It was no relic. It was a piece of something bigger. A console jutted from the structure's side, perfectly shaped to cradle the object. My hand trembled as I slid it into place. The cavern roared to life. Light exploded through the chamber, blinding at first, then softening into streams that traced along the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The symbols blazed like stars, connecting in intricate patterns until they formed a map. Not of the seas, not of the land, of the skies. I stumbled back, breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a treasure, it wasn't a weapon, it was a beacon. The warplane outside, the lighthouse above, the hidden hatch. They weren't random pieces. They were built here to guard this thing, to hide it, maybe even to bury it. Because whatever it was, it had the power to call out, and the message was already transmitting. I could feel it, a low hum in the marrow of my bones, radiating outward, upward, beyond me, beyond this world. Duke pressed against my leg, whining softly. His eyes reflected the glow, and for a moment, I swore he understood more than I did. I thought of the stranger, of the men hunting us. They hadn't come for gold or glory. They'd come to stop this. Or maybe to use it. And now I had unleashed it. The symbols shifted again, and among the cascading lights, one glowed brighter than the rest. A point marked far across the map of stars. A destination. Someone, or something out there, had just received the call. My knees weakened, but I forced myself upright, clutching Duke's collar for strength. I didn't know what would come next. Allies, enemies, neither. All I knew was that the world above was no longer the same. The lighthouse wasn't just a ruin. It was a warning post, a guardian against the truth buried below. And now that truth was awake. Duke let out a low bark, not of fear, but of resolve. His loyalty, as always, was unshakable. I placed a hand on his head, staring at the glowing map overhead. "Looks like we've started something, boy," I whispered. The cavern pulsed once more, brighter than ever, casting us in a light that felt both holy and terrifying. The beacon was lit. And the world would never be the same.